Now, is that enough? No, it's not enough to just say hello to your neighbor. Then you need to create the space, the time, permission, and the space for those people to get to know one another beyond their name.
Welcome to the Chesley Lunday Experience. I'm your host. That's right, Chesley Lunday. Now, the purpose of this podcast is to help your church innovate in an age of disruption. But to do that, you can't continue to do what you've always done. No, you need new ideas and creative approaches to rethink and redesign the methods of the past. Because let's be honest, it is really cool to be a disruptive organization. It is not cool to be the organization getting disrupted. And so I'm here to help you discover those out-of-the-box aha moments so that you can take those and apply them to your unique context. Today, we're going to continue our conversation with Carrie Melissa Jones. So if you haven't checked out part 1, I would highly encourage you to do that. We are going to talk about how to build a brand communities. In fact, that's what she's the author of. Her work has influenced the world's leading online brand communities, including the American Medical Association, Patreon, Google, and 2 U.S. presidential campaigns. And she is the author of the award-winning book, that's right, Building Brand Communities, How Organizations Succeed by Creating Belonging with Charles Vogel, who is also an amazing author, and I hope to get him on this podcast, and a student, teacher, and researcher of virtual communities at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Now, here's the deal. Last week, when we had our first episode with her, she really hit home to us church leaders. She said, you can build an audience, but that doesn't mean you're building a community. In fact, if your ego is in the way, community may form in spite of you, but it will not form because of you. Now, us as church leaders, we'd like to think we're pious, and sometimes, we have altruistic motives, and then other times we don't. So I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to relax just a second, because I think she's going to help us in this second part of the interview begin to dissect what it means to build a community. So we got a little bit of a, taken to the woodshed moment, a come to Jesus conversation last week. She's going to begin to open up what it looks like to build a community. And if you're thinking, wow, we don't do brands around here. Well, you're probably not listening to this podcast. But if you are, don't think of brands as a marketing ploy. A brand is an identifier. It is what people think of when they think of you. And you can chalk that up to Roy Vaden, because I did not come up with that saying. Roy Vaden is an amazing guy. Brands are what people think of when they think of you. So when we're talking about building communities, wouldn't it be cool to build a community of love, mission, acceptance, all the things that Jesus called us to, and the brand being, what are they thinking of when they think of you, your church, my church, the church? Can we build a brand community that is so on fire for Jesus and so in tune with their values that when people think of us, they think of the right things? They stop thinking of judgmentalism. They stop thinking of being politically active. They stop thinking of we all vote in the same single block. They start thinking that we are compassionate, we are loving, we are creative, we are innovative. And that's what she's going to talk about.
Nobody got into church world thinking, you know what, it needs to be about me. But somehow along the way, with our models and our methods, we have built a mirage to what we were actually supposed to be building. And it's all because of our own egos. So thank you for that.
Not unique. It's also not unique.
I know. It's human nature. But don't let me get into theology. I think Charles, your partner, would really, you would have fun with that. But yeah, no, you're right. Tell me more. Why is it not unique?
Well, this idea of ego is something that, especially in Western culture, we have to battle against on a just daily, minutely basis, just checking ourselves. Like, is this about me or is this about something completely not about me at all, which it usually is.
Right.
And so that's pervasive in our culture. We also live in a very individualist society. And so we tend to think, what works for me works for everyone. And that's just not true. But you'll see organizations just calling things community that aren't, and putting a leader in place who is not necessarily a community leader. They're more about elevating their own platform, elevating themselves. And so you see a lot of influencers, or trying to think of, I don't want to call out anybody, but I'm thinking of okay, let's take Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah, Gary V. Yes.
I'm sure he's a wonderful person. Calls his followers the Gary Nation or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. And just because people are following what he has to say doesn't mean that they're in a community. It's the exact same concept, and he is not unique in that. And that's what all this influencer culture is as well. And a lot of social media influencers will say, oh, my community. It's like, well, if you need to move next week and you're in a really bad situation, you got to move your whole house from one place to the next. How many of those people are going to show up and help you pack those boxes?
Wow, that's good. So I'm in the cutting edge of the church world as far as building a digital community that we would call a church. And because of that, what I've realized is taking the things that, Gary V does, or some of these influencers do, which is they build a personal brand. It's a very cool tool to build a large audience, but that's not actually, you're saying that's not the community. That's actually the first step of a marketing funnel in a way. But
it's very important.
So churches, I think some churches understand this from a personality perspective. I mean, you've seen large pastors that end up on TV or whatever. They're building a personal brand. They're not building the church brand, but they can use that brand to pull people into a community. But you're saying hey, don't confuse the two. Don't confuse the marketing funnel with the community. And most of the time, that's what ends up happening. If I'm hearing you correctly, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And both are very important. I mean, if you want to build a larger community, then people need to know that you exist. Therefore, it's important to market your personal brand or the church's brand, quote unquote. But the investments to create that mutual concern for people are different, very, very different than what you need to actually get them in the door. So that's the main.
Let me ask a question to you, just based off of curiosity. So I'm probably going to go down a rabbit hole here. When it comes to community building, there is this there's this idea that if you build the community, you build the brand, they'll just automatically come into the community, and that's not actually true. So what do you have to do to create a community? What do you have to do to utilize that brand to move them into community?
Yeah, so that's if you build it, will come. That's anyone who's built any community at any point knows that is just not
and that's what we do with buildings. But
right? It's the start of something. It's fantastic. It could be what my co-author Charles Vogel calls a temple. In many cases, literally.
So I love Charles. He wrote The Art of Community, and for anybody that is a church leader, read the book, because what you realize is he literally he ripped off Jesus's model. Which way to go! I applaud that. I'm celebrating that. Charles did an amazing job.
Yeah, he is a divinity scholar, and he's brilliant, and synthesizes centuries of knowledge into a model that's then possible to create for yourself.
Sorry, back to the fact that if you build it, they will come. I keep interrupting you. I hardly ever do that, but
No,
I'm having fun. You're getting me giddy. I have coffee. Like it's
it's like a real conversation.
Right.
It's not like an interview
Right.
where we're like,
yeah.
here's the question.
Yeah.
Here's my answer. Here's the question. It's just not true that people will come if you build the building or build the, especially an online platform. What you can do to start to create that investment intentionally is, one, to make it extremely clear. What is your purpose? What are you here to do? Why should people show up? And get that really clear internally as an organization or as an individual. Again, making it not about you, but about the purpose. And then putting that out into the world and making sure that your values are also really, really clear. So when I work with clients, everywhere from pre-launch startups to the Fortune 500, there's only 4 to 5 values is the top that you should have. If you have more stated values than 4 to 5 for your community, it becomes impossible to make decisions that align with those values because they start to contradict one another.
Yeah.
So when you have the purpose and the values, all of the work of building community comes from those two things, is what I've realized over years of doing this work. If you have those two things, you can create something completely unique, completely yours, and you can start to form relationships among people who feel drawn to those values and to that purpose. So you'll attract people who want the same things that you want and want to be part of that thing. That is, again, larger than you and your ego. It's about the purpose. So you really have to galvanize around that, not around the leader themselves.
Yeah. So that leads me into my next question, because as we were talking, as you're talking, like there's, if you look at John Laguerre, do you know who he is? So he was with CEO of T-Mobile. You have Bill Gates with Microsoft. You have Steve Jobs with Apple. All these leaders ended up becoming the personification of the brand, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So is it people, because you're saying it's not about the individual, it's got to be about the community, but do people really actually follow like a brand, or do they follow a person?
That's a great question. It's something that I wrestle with constantly with clients, especially. So there are some brands that really do have like cult following. So Douglas Atkin, the author of the book The Culting of Brands, writes about some of these brands. You know, like you've got your
Harley Davidson.
Yeah, Harley Davidson. Apple is one of them.
Absolutely. As I sit in front of my Apple, setup. Yes.
Why did I give you so much money? Oh,
I wanted to be cool.
However, I don't feel like I'm part of the Apple community. And so the main difference there is not all consumers and loyalists, is what I hear a lot of marketers call it in the business world, are part of a community just because they are loyal to a brand. So not all Harley riders are members of a Harley community. However, there is the Harley owners group communities, which are all over the world, and just every country in the world almost has a Harley owners group. And there are groups of people who come together to ride together week after week, year after year. Like my father was a president of the Golden Gate chapter for a year. You could only hold the position for 1 year. And he would, run these charity rides, and they would go places where they wouldn't normally be able to go because they didn't have people to go with, they went on a bunch of mission trips and went to all the California missions. And that is the community. All of just purchasing Harley Davidson products does not make you a community member, but showing up to the Harley owners group.
You're stabbing a knife in the heart of so many church leaders right now, just so you know. Like you're just like, bam, right? Like truth. It's so great. So I'm gonna push this into the church world for a second. You said you can be a Jesus loyalist and buy the product, but never actually be part of his kingdom. Did I just hear that correctly?
I did not.
No.
personally say that,
I'm translating, but is that basically the same essence of what you just said? If Jesus was the brand, and forgive me, no. Obviously, Jesus is a person, but basically, you could be a Jesus loyalist and never be a part of his community.
Yeah, so you can live by the principles. You can listen to the word and read the word and still not be part of a committed group devoted to this and living it every day, living with others.
For you who haven't had a lot of experience in the church world, like how does that resound to you as somebody who builds communities and helps others build communities? Like, what does that do for you? Like, just thinking about that.
Well, I mean, you might have noticed I kind of bristled
I
with the idea. Mostly because I know how strongly people feel about religion, and as they should, which is very different than how they feel about brands. Like, just because I shop at Sephora does not mean I'm in, the Sephora has like a whole philosophy and way of living behind it, and way of being in relation to others. And I also don't want to demean this idea that living the principles is not enough.
Yeah.
So just because you don't have, let's say you don't have a worshiping community, but you still, are devoted to this, doesn't mean it's not an important part of your life and is not meaningful and is not who you are. But to be part of a community is to come together with others to mutually support one another through that journey.
Yeah.
So, and we are living in the loneliest era
of history. We are. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So just living the principles is great. And as human beings, we are social creatures. Loneliness leads to all kinds of horrific outcomes, health, mental health, physical health, social health. And we need that more than ever before. So it's sort of like taking it to the next level.
So one of the things that, if you can think of a Venn diagram, like me and a couple of my team members were talking about this yesterday, but I'm going to use so church leaders will understand this word, at least most of them will, ecclesiology. It is the study of the structure of church. And we've been talking about, you've had all these rules and regulations. You talked about having more than 4 or 5 values makes it almost impossible to make a decision. But if you can boil down to what Jesus was doing, he said mission, community, and devotion. And then where they converge, if you got the Venn diagram, that place in the middle, that's where all the power of the kingdom of heaven is in operation in your life. And so if you can do mission and devotion, but you don't have community, you're not hitting the bullseye. So as you're talking, I'm like, I think Jesus is both, and it's a paradox, right? Both the most inclusive and exclusive person on the planet, like in all history. Like he does both at the same time. You're like, it's almost like mental whiplash at times, But I think what he's doing is he's getting at that point. Like, okay, you have devotion, you have the mission of being for people in relationship with the outsider. Like, be loving and compassionate and serve those people, and then build community with each other. And so many people have built mirage communities that have hurt people. And this is the reason why people don't go into local worship communities, is because Jesus said, they'll know you're my disciples for the love you have for not the outsider, for each other. So he's actually talking about, if you build authentic, cool, really great community, people are going to be like, that's what I want. That obviously Jesus is among you because Jesus is cool and you act like him, And what especially the American church has done is they've built a mirage community that's about ego, and it's about power, and it's not mutual submission. It's not love and compassion. It is about hierarchy. And the outside world has said, no, thank you. And in the process, some of my closest friends that love Jesus are completely devoted. What they've done is said, I'm for the mission. I'm totally devoted, but I don't do community. And it's our fault. So when you were saying what you were saying, it was something that I need church leaders to hear. Well, like you're speaking things that Jesus was telling us, but you're saying it in 21st century language. So, and I think leaders for sure need to hear the fact that as a leader, you can be for the mission and devotion, but if you're not doing community, you're not actually doing what Jesus called you to do. So I would not put that burden on you, Carrie, but I would definitely put that burden on the people that say they're all about community and they're leading the community when they're actually not. Yeah. So thank you for just continuing to rebuke us, because we need it. We need it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when we say, be in community, it sounds like you're like, what does that mean? A lot of people are like, okay, great. It's very small actions that actually are what matter. Like if you are on a stage, you have the power to say, turn to your neighbor and greet them. And I grew up going to a Methodist church with my family, and that was part of the ritual every week was shaking people's hands.
Which we can't do anymore because of COVID. Yay!
But like it's just a symbol. You can wave at someone, and it has the exact same effect.
I get it.
It's about making a connection that you didn't have before. Now, is that enough? No, it's not enough to just say hello to your neighbor. Then you need to create the space, the time, permission, and the space for those people to get to know one another beyond their name and what street they live on or whatever. Because that's the real work of community building, is then creating that time, permission, and space. So it is really important to have, your after church gatherings and, worship groups and things having nothing to do with worship, where you're just going out and doing service and all of that. And even if 2 people show up, you're still building community. I think that's the other thing, is people think it has to be huge, and it doesn't. So, in fact, some of the most meaningful communities are small.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would, I guess what you're saying there, I'm thinking through all of Sunday morning and the function of what Sunday morning has become, which is it's listening to a guy talk about the scripture and his the best he can to work through all of the idiosyncrasies and the doctrine behind what scripture is saying, right? And so he's relaying that to people based off of his worldview. And so there's a function for that, I'm guessing, even in community, you're saying, but that's not the only thing. So
storytelling is part of community building, telling the story, and translating those values and the principles into storytelling so that people can understand it. But that's not enough to get people over this. Very vulnerable to ask people to show up and be in relationship with one another. And a lot of people are, especially now, I think, quite afraid of strangers.
Yeah.
And again, that's like a human impulse. It's like, well, I don't know you. And historically, evolutionarily speaking, that means that you might be dangerous to me. And so it's scary for me to approach you or whatever. So, I mean, I've been to gatherings where it's so meaningful to have a leader say, here are the rules for this space. Here's what we will create together. Now you go and live by those rules and create these things. And then the leader steps back. That's what's most important, is that leader actually has to step back at some point and let people talk to each other without their intervening. Because if it's all one to many, it's not a community. You've got to get the many to many relationships formed. And the only way to safely do that, there's no completely safe way to do it, but the way to safely do it is to create the container for it. And even if that's not you as the leader doing it, still creating or giving power to other leaders or letting them take their own power to self-organize is another way to allow for community to take shape.
I really love our conversation with Carrie. Now, we're going to begin to unpack what a church might look like in her eyes if she had to do it all over again, which is really cool. One, she's not a church goer, and so it's pretty cool to see it from a fresh perspective. So I try to tell her, like, hey, all that stuff you remember about church in your mind, just like get rid of that completely. Let's rebuild the church. That's our conversation for next week. I'm super excited about it. But this week, I want to talk about something. I want to talk about the fact that audience building is not the same as community building. I'm going to say that again. Audience building is not the same as community building. And so often in church, I believe we have traded one over the other. Now, here's what I know to be true about following Jesus. The mission of God is to expand the kingdom of heaven where we live, work, learn, and play. And in doing so, we invite others to become part of the family of God. The kingdom is also a family. We are wanting to change the culture around us in business and in arts and entertainment and education and politics, all the 7 hills of culture, if you will. There are 7 domains, and that's part of the kingdom. And in the process, as we go, as we're on mission, making disciples, we also need to be the most amazing community this world has ever seen. This community that is bound in the bonds of love is what Paul said, and has began to have real values of submission, mutual submission, of preferring one another over the other. But community always gets lost in the fact that it's really fun to build an audience. I mean, I'm talking to you right now. It's fun talking to you. It's fun getting to know who you guys are and being able to share a message with the world. That's evangelization. That's amazing. But it's not the same as building a community. God, through Jesus, gave gifts to the church. These gifts are the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the pastor, and the teacher for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry. 3 of them are expansion. 2 of them are for the community. And so often we think pastoring is getting up on a stage, pontificating about our favorite opinion of Scripture. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But what I am saying is maybe we're missing the point. We must be a community on mission. All of us together, so that we come to the unity of the faith, to grow up in all the maturity, all of who Jesus is. This is Paul's rally cry for the church. Let's stop audience building for the sake of building an audience. Let's start audience building so that we can turn them into a community. Build your audience so that you can build the community. Don't let building the community take second place to building your audience. I'm so excited about next week's conversation with Carrie. I want you to take a listen to a little bit of what we're talking about.
And so what that often looks like for me as a consultant is asking questions like, what do you want to see in the future? How do you think we're going to get there today? Can we get there through what we're doing today? And oftentimes there'll be a moment where people think they realize, like, no, we can't get to where we want to go, how we've been going there. And they oftentimes can take let's say the bones of what they had and recreate it. It doesn't have to be like throw out all of our traditions. It's like, no way. In fact, those traditions are part of what people are joining to be a part of something that's like grounded in years and years and years and generations of
legacy.
Ritual.
Yeah.
That's deeply meaningful. So don't throw it out, but think about, okay, well, if community is one of our values and we're not heading toward helping people connect to one another, what about that tradition needs to shift or change?
Man, I can't wait. Next week is going to be so amazing. Remember, it is so much cooler to be a disruptive organization than it is to be the disrupted organization. I want you to flourish. My whole goal in life is that the church accomplishes the task of the Great Commission. You know what would be really cool? It would be really cool to do it before I'm 90 years old, but it'd really be cool to like be on my deathbed. No, we're going to finish it. We're going to finish it. And I don't know if that's possible, but good Lord, if I could go to heaven and tell Paul that, hey, I beat him because of you guys. I don't know. I'm competitive. What can I say? I really want to finish the task. Don't you? I really want to do this together. Don't you? I really want to be unified as one body. Don't you? That's what this is all about. And we're not going to be able to do it the way we've always done it. We need to move from the centralized paradigm of the past. We need to evolve beyond that centralized paradigm and begin to transform into a distributed community on mission together, a family on mission together, doing the things that Jesus did, living the way Jesus lived, leading the way Jesus led, and innovating the way Jesus innovated. I can't wait to see you next time on the Chesley Lunday Experience.